On the surface, it feels like it's a conversation about human and AI and a relationship that we have. But on a deeper level, it's actually something that's very human.
Actually, have to be honest, it was a little bit uncomfortable reading it. These are the experiences of real women. It's not just a fictional AI experience.
It's that control that we see and that isolation.
Because the women are always questioning themselves, okay, can I trust myself? Can I trust others? Can I trust this world? Will I be safe? The biggest battle that women face, whom we work with, is actually trusting herself.
It's not just about Annie, it's about us. Today's book, Annie Bought by Sierra Greer, drops us into a world that feels uncomfortably close to our own, where AI companions aren't speculative, they're real, and human relationships are no longer the only kind people rely on. At the center of the story is Annie, an AI Stella, a highly advanced companion designed to meet her owner Doug's emotional and physical needs. She can shift between different modes, from a housekeeper to an attentive partner, and even to what the book calls a cuddle bunny for intimacy. Annie is in autodidactic mode, which means she is constantly learning, adapting, and refining herself based on Doug's preferences. With every update, every interaction, she becomes better at understanding what pleases him, almost like an algorithm optimizing itself in real time. What makes Annie particularly striking is how human she appears. Unlike some companions who have visible markers that distinguish them from humans, Annie is custom built. She closely resembles Doug's ex-girlfriend, and he continues to modify her, sending her in for regular tune-ups where he requests changes to her body and appearance, including, if it were as easy as that, shedding a specific number of pounds he wants. She is in every sense designed to his exact specifications. But beneath this setup, the novel is less about technology and more about psychology. It becomes a deeply unsettling exploration of power, control, and emotional dependence. We experience the relationship largely through Annie's perspective as she tries to make sense of Doug's behavior, his affection, and even his cruelty. Because Annie is learning emotions rather than naturally feeling them, moments of confusion become especially powerful. When Doug introduces another companion, Delta, Annie encounters jealousy. But when she looks it up, she learns it's considered an unattractive trait, and so she tries to suppress it. Her understanding of emotion is filtered through definitions rather than lived experience, which makes her incredibly vulnerable. That vulnerability is exploited further by Doug's friend Roland, who manipulates Annie into believing that having a secret or even betraying Doug might make her more real. It's a moment that highlights how easily Annie can be influenced and how the humans around her seem to bend moral rules to suit their own needs. At the same time, Doug himself is deeply conflicted. He hides Annie from most people, aware that his dependence on an AI companion, one modeled after his ex, might be seen as pathetic. And yet, he projects his insecurities, frustrations, and control onto her, creating a relationship that is as revealing as it is troubling. I really enjoyed the book, and in many ways it makes you uncomfortable. There's something about what Annie is going through that keeps you hooked. You want to keep reading to understand where it's all headed. But more than that, it raised questions for me about our own vulnerability in relationships. In some ways, we as humans are autodidactic too. We're constantly learning, making mistakes, adapting to the people we're with, often without even realizing it. And that's what makes this story linger. It's not just about Annie, it's about us. I'm so excited to get into all of this with my guests, Bharathy and Wan Qing today. Bharathy is the founder of Kshamata, an organization she established in 2011 that is doing deeply transformative work with women and girls who have experienced trafficking and gender-based violence. With over 2 decades of experience working across organizations like UNICEF, the government of Maharashtra, and anti-trafficking organizations in India, she has spent her career not just rescuing women from exploitative situations, but asking the harder question, what comes after? How do you rebuild a life, restore dignity, and create a real sense of belonging again? At Kshamata, she's built a holistic model that supports survivors through every stage of that journey, from healing and trauma-informed care to skilling and livelihood training. And as a founder, Bharati brings a very real understanding of what it takes to build something like this, the personal sacrifices, the persistence, and the emotional investment required to stay committed to work that is both urgent and deeply human. We're also joined by Wan Qing, co-founder of Hatch and board chair of Kita, based in Singapore. Wan Qing's work sits at the intersection of impact and enterprise, driven by a deep belief in unlocking potential across people, systems, and opportunities. Her journey has taken her from grassroots volunteering and working with children with special needs to building communities and exploring how businesses can create meaningful, scalable impact. She co-founded Hatch to tackle a fundamental gap, access to meaningful work. Hatch is a social venture that supports individuals, particularly those who are underemployed, to discover pathways into careers they might not otherwise have access to, regardless of their background or networks. Alongside this, she chairs Kita, a youth development nonprofit that goes a step further, creating spaces where young people don't just prepare for jobs, but explore identity, agency, and what it means to shape their own futures. Thank you both for joining me and welcome. Let me first start with you, Wan Qing. Let me get your thoughts on the book. Tell me how it felt for you.
I found it a very easy read. I actually was a literature student when I was growing up. So like when I was in university and also when I was in secondary school, I read a lot of literature books. And I can see why it's an interesting topic to talk about. I think on the surface, it feels like it's a conversation about human and AI and the relationship that we have. But on a deeper level, it's actually something that's very human, right? How do we feel about being valued? And how do we feel about our own relationships with other people? How do we interact with other people? The scene that really, really stuck with me was the conversation that Doug and Annie had with the therapist, Monica. I think that was really, really like the most poignant scene for me. And seeing how both of them withdrew at certain points from the therapist, and some of the points that the therapist kind of reflected back to them was really powerful for me. Yeah, so I think overall, I would say it's a pretty memorable. I do feel that I think at certain points, like the book does tend to general cliches about like the whole arguments about like AI and human. I do feel that some of the points that it raised feels a bit simplistic. Like it doesn't really raise the full range of like issues that we talk about in the human and AI relationships.
No, thanks for that, Wan Qing, and I'll come back to that conversation that Doug and Annie have with the therapist, because I do want to explore a little bit more of that with you. But Bharathy, your quick ideas on the book, how did you find it?
I actually have to be honest, it was a little bit uncomfortable reading it. And I think it gave me a different lens. Obviously, because we work with women who have gone through experiences of what Annie is going through in the book. We see it on an everyday basis. It was too familiar. And at the same time, it gave me a distance. Okay, this is a fictional AI. So it's happening at a distance. However, it made me feel very uncomfortable. It hit too close to home many times at different times. Usually I avoid seeing films and reading books which hit very close to home, because we keep listening to raw stories and everyday stories that are from women from gender-based violence backgrounds, just like we have seen in the character Annie here. These are the experiences of real women. It's not just a fictional AI experience. It was a punch in the gut. It made me think a lot more on the dynamics part. So which I usually avoid doing with movies and books. But I think this was a great experience to explore what I was feeling, because I've been in this work for many years. You tend to feel pretty jaded many times when you work for so many years. But this kind of made me think quite a bit again. Yeah.
No, thanks for that, Bharati. Yeah, definitely. Sometimes the work that we do, and especially the work that you do, is so hard hitting. Perhaps you don't want to see art, see plays, movies about it as well. Yeah. But Wan Qing, coming back to the point you made about it's very simplistic in some ways, right? I think one of the points the book makes is how it's probably easier to be with AI than to be with a person, because there's less friction, there's less disagreement, there's less unpredictability. Annie is actually custom built to the needs that Doug has, from the way she looks to then even the updates that she has. But you were talking about the conversation they have with the therapist, who's an expert in human-bot relationships, and it seems like that's going to be a new job description that's going to exist, and so we'll see a lot more people having expertise in that. But I think I was really interested, from your work in youth and technology, how are you thinking about this? And not just in terms of jobs and careers. I know you work a lot with youth to make sure that they are keeping their skills updated for the challenges, etc., that they're going to face at work. But, we know now technology has a role to play in relationships. And so I was very curious to see if you had thoughts around that, and how perhaps that is going to play a role in how youth need to think about what they need to know and how they need to understand the world around them.
It's a top of mind issue for us, because I think for some of the youths that we work with, so we will work with, say, youths that may have dropped out of school, come from low income. we also work with persons with disability. And I think particularly for a lot of these groups, like they don't have necessarily like a role model sometimes for some of the norms that they're trying to learn. So for example, like for person with disability, it's very hard for them to pick up social cues. So they need someone to guide them on like, is this an appropriate thing to say? Why did the person say this to me? And for the youth case, it's sometimes for their own kind of family background. They don't have someone who say is going into like a office work environment, and there are cues that they don't have someone that they can bounce off with. And so they turn to AI, right? I think in the initial stages when we were kind of training them, it did feel very empowering. In some sense, it returns that kind of agency to the person, right? Like, I have a question, regardless of how it may sound to other people, I know that I have a tool that will be able to give me some form of working answer. The part that I think is quite nice, and the power of what technology can do to level the playing field for every individual. But at the same time, I think what we're seeing in our own programs and like with the youth is it becomes a very isolating experience. Like every single thing that they go through, like we have a couple of students who turn to AI for everything instead of talking to the person. So one of our youths we've been supporting, she got into an argument with her dad, and she was trying to micro-analyze like every single thing that the dad said through talking with AI. And we were encouraging her to, why not just talk to your dad, like sit down with your father and just talk it through. But because she's conflict avoidant and it's echo chamber, right? Because the AI will echo your own thoughts back to you. And what happens is then that she feels like her thoughts are the most correct, and she doesn't really have someone to kind of be that balance and mirror for her. So she just kind of exists within that AI bubble, and everything that she does, she just kind of asks the AI. I think like in our work, we do see that parts of this is because young people are getting more lonely. Like for a lot of young people, there's a study by like IPS, right? Like the number of people that we can call when in crisis has fallen. If you think about the fact of like the sheer number of people that you can call if you're in crisis is fallen over the years. I don't think it's like the correct, like the only metrics of how we should measure this. It is quite overwhelming to live in the world that we live in, right? There's so many signals about how the world is changing. Jobs are depleting. There's an entire arms race. There's a lot of climate anxiety. And all these things combined like makes it very hard for a young person to kind of navigate a lot of these things. And if you don't have like good social networks and kind of safety nets, it can be quite tough. Yeah, so I think we are learning and trying to balance the space between seeing AI as a equalizer and also recognizing that if they are left to their own devices, this can be quite damaging.
And I think I want to bring in the context of isolation here and talk about the aspect in the book where Doug's control could be seen, where to counter Annie's isolation, the company that she was from suggested these two AI companions, and she could call them anytime. And of course, they were AI companions, but she felt like talking to them made her feel better. And when he was angry with her, he took that away from her and he said,
Yes,
you can't do that anymore. It's that control that we see, and that isolation, and keeping the person in isolation being a form of control that someone in a relationship can use, and that's not great either. And Bharati, let me bring you in there. You spoke about your work and how you are working with women at a point where they want to sort of do something about relationships that they're in that are not good for them. They've faced abuse. What does that moment look like in real life when they know they have another way, another pathway? And again, bringing the book back, we know that Annie tries to run away with Delta when Doug is in Vegas, and they just like cycle away and they're trying to run away from him. She doesn't really know with certainty where she's going. There's not really a clear path. She's trying to figure it out. I think in that context, what are the emotional and practical realities of rebuilding a sense of self when you're stepping out into the unknown after sort of going through what you go through in an abusive relationship?
The moment of leaving that was depicted in the book is a lot like what we see with the women whom we work with. I think there's no roadmap. It's a desire to leave, but you don't know when you want to and how would you. When Cody really says to Annie that it is, you will be eaten alive in the world, to quote, I think the system themselves are built to make the women believe that. So the entire isolation you talked about, the way they have been treated, They have been made to believe by traffickers or by abusers, you won't survive outside. And that becomes a hurdle in their mind. And many times, after leaving as well, they do not know where to go, what to do. And the support systems also that may come later also may reinforce that belief, oh, it's very hard, you won't be accepted, you are worthless, it's too late, you're too gone. So I think that kind of really hurts me, because when women come to us, they really don't know. They have not navigated in society, they don't know how to do. Many of them don't even have bank accounts.
And
So,
Bharti,
yeah,
it's a very long journey, right? I think your typical program goes into months and years, because the sort of the process of rehabilitation and working with these women is a very long one.
Yeah, and I think we don't start with, okay, now let's train you, let's make you independent. No, that's not the language that you speak in the beginning. You have to work on two things. Main things are trust, and the other one is creating a safe space, so protection. So these are very key when women leave or are removed from exploitative circumstances. You have to work on these two, because the women are always questioning themselves, okay, can I trust myself? Can I trust others? Can I trust this world? Will I be safe? They always believe that the abusive situation is much safer than the world outside. So I think that unlearning and shifting of mindset and trusting herself, I think the biggest battle that women face whom we work with is actually trusting herself. And once you work on that part, is trusting herself, is the biggest reformation or the transformation that you see. So it is trusting in others who have lied to you, who've used you, trusting in the world, who may not accept you. There is a taboo associated with it. But the greatest battle is trusting your own self, which they have inadvertently been taught not to. So I think this is very clearly which hit me hard on in this book.
Super. Bharati, does that mean that you're going to recommend that folks who want to understand your work read this book?
It blew my mind, actually, frankly speaking. And it really shows me how rebuilding trust takes time, which I think there are too many hurdles to it, like the book also shows. And it requires for me, what opened my eyes for the work that I do, and I could say it now, is that rebuilding, that takes time and cannot be rushed. So very, very much people think, oh, you are removed from the exploitative situation, now you're all good, now everything can happen for you, and it'll all be rosy from now. No, the battle begins then. And it cannot be done by one person or one organization. It requires an entire ecosystem to work for that rebuilding of trust. So I think, yes, this book could depict in many ways what we do. The nuanced version of what we do is what people can know.
And one step removed, like you said, right? Because you can...
Yeah, many people shut down. We have seen many people, when you show them the stark reality of what women feel, they just shut down. I think it's too stark many a times. And many people can't take the message when it is too stark or too deep or something that's too heavy.
And Bharti, I can talk about visiting the sites with you and going to the brothel area, and how actually there's a bodily response as well. It's very, very difficult to look at some of that. But
initially when I was working in the brothel areas, I faced depression to some extent. Yes, I couldn't work for some days, and for some weeks I couldn't handle it. But yes, I feel for my team now. And it's not just the brothel area. It is also when you have the residential center. Caregiving is not easy. Building of trust and confidentiality is not easy. It takes a toll on you, whoever works in this environment.
And Wan Qing, let me bring you back from your experience with literature. Are there people that you would recommend that read this book as well, or did it remind you or help you understand some of the other literature that you'd read?
Yeah. No, I wanted to bring out a point that Bharathy was raising about like the trust, and I thought it was quite a powerful statement. For example, like in Annie's case, she felt safer to stay in Doug's house because she doesn't really know where else she can go. So in the book, I think one memory I had when I was reading the book was the first time when she ran away from the house. I kind of expected her to just run away, but I didn't realize that the safest place that she knew was the mechanic. So when it was revealed that she was running the mechanic's house, I was like, oh, that makes sense, because she actually doesn't know anybody else. But in my mind, when I was reading it, I was like, okay, but running to the mechanic is also a not very smart idea, because the mechanic has an obligation to report it. And I think that mirrors a lot of the real life situations that we see, right? Yeah, so I think when I was reading the book, the thing that came to mind, and this was a movie actually that came out like years ago about this idea. Like I think back when AI wasn't that big of a thing yet, like there was this movie, I think it was called Her, where this guy falls in love with a bot and doesn't want to kill her. Yeah, so I think that was something that I drew a lot of parallels with immediately when I think about like just in itself this relationship, right? Like I think in terms of like the human and bot relationship. Towards the end of the book, there was a lot more like kind of understanding of like what does it mean to be in a relationship where you are no longer happy? What does it mean to be in a relationship where you don't have full freedom? Yeah, and I think like that concept of freedom came out a lot. No particular book comes to mind, but I think the entire kind of like talking about like that that whole Annie's world being controlled by Tang, and then the fact that she had no connections at the end. And I think the poignant thing for me was that at the end of the book where she decides to run away, then she kind of just sits by the lake and just looks at the lake. And I thought that was quite a powerful scene in my mind. I was like, yeah, I think that's happiness to her.
Yeah, the image of Joaquin Phoenix with his mustache, I think that's how he looks in Her, came to
Yeah.
mind when you were talking about it. And I think the point that you make about just how rapidly the world in AI is changing, and how maybe when Her came out, it was like a futuristic, distant reality. But at this point of time, something like what we
Yeah.
see in Anibot is so eminent. It seems really
Yeah.
close to. It's not even science fiction anymore. It's just fiction, because it's about to
Yes.
happen. So that was a really interesting aspect of the book for me. But yeah, as we sort of close the conversation, just want to hear your last thoughts about the book and anything that you would like folks who want to give it a try to know about, and of course your recommendations of books that maybe you're reading right now as well. Wang Qing, you want to go first?
Yeah. The part of the book that really stayed with me was how the therapist had named the likeness between Doug and Annie. That at the end of the day, a lot of the emotions that Annie is feeling, Doug actually has walked some parts of it. Even though she is a bot, but there is a certain sentience and consciousness behind her decisions, and she too is affected by a lot of these decisions. A lot of times, like for us as humans, like we think that, you know, we have a moral consciousness and things like that. I think the feeling that, a thought that kind of came to my mind is that we are, one part of like why things go the way that they do is because of hubris, like the human pride and thinking that we're above it. But actually maybe we are not that much above or in control of the situation, and to acknowledge and just kind of accept that like we may not fully know. I think that's one thing that I thought about when I was like thinking about for the book. I think for people who want to read a book, look beyond the human and bot interactions. I think this book is a much more deeper conversations about like how is our own relationships with people, how do we see our own worth, and in some ways it parallels a feeling that a lot of us like can resonate with, like the feeling of loneliness, the need to be loved. Why we ourselves do certain things, right? Like because we want to seek the approval of people around us. And I think those are universal feelings that transcends just the human and bot kind of relationship. Yeah, so for people who look at the title and just see the bot, I think that this is a much deeper exploration of human emotions. I think it's a really easy read. I think personally for me, it's a really easy read. And I am also cognizant that I am privileged not to have encountered similar situations in my own life, but I empathize a lot more for people who may feel for the story while they go through it. Like, I do think that at some parts of the story, it can get very uncomfortable for people who may have lived experiences that mirrors what Annie gone
Yeah,
through.
Bharati?
Yeah, for me, what stood out is how the sense of identity often was overridden by a sense of survival. So she was trying to please and create an action, survive in her environment, and so to make him happy, okay, he should not get angry. You know, how your sense of identity is overridden by a sense of survival. And that's what I have actually seen in so many women, is that, okay, my sense of identity is evolving, but it doesn't take precedence over my sense of survival in a situation like an abusive situation. And how that changes and how long it takes to change, how so many complex factors are there to change it. I think for me that struck hard, the way she was trying to adapt in that and yet struggling with her sense of identity. I think this is what stood out for me. And I think there are so many nuances. If you can read it in that sense, in that lens, there's a lot of nuances. It's an interesting read. It gets uncomfortable for me personally, and I'm sure it is an eye-opener for many people when we talk about the intersectionality of gender-based violence, and the work
Yeah, it
that
looks
we
like
do.
both of
So,
you are
yeah.
thanking me for recommending the book and making you read it. But thank you both so much for joining me today. I am so delighted that we had this conversation, and thank you for your really amazing insights and your personal reflections as well. So much of what we explore in AnnieBot is about isolation and the need for Annie to understand the world and the few people she has in her life with intensity. I recently read I Who Have Not Known Men, and the protagonist, who's unnamed, reminded me of Annie in many ways. The other book that explored the context of a human companion taking the place of another, this time a daughter, is Clara and the Sun, one of my all-time favorites. I hope you can read both of these books. This is Gunjali, and thank you for listening to the Changemakers Book Club.